I saw her hand move. It was slow, barely a twitch, but it moved. The woman had been dead for at least a year, maybe more. Her skin was gray, pulled tight over bone like sun-baked leather, and she was sitting bolt upright in the passenger seat of my truck. My truck was totally locked. We were parked on Main Street, the only street of the town of Oakhaven. I was screaming, but no sound was coming out. It was like every muscle in my throat had frozen solid. I was completely trapped. This changed everything I knew about death. I used to think of a body as just a shell, a leftover. But the thing in my truck? It was a host. And whatever was driving it, whatever was using her rotting eyes to stare right through me, was hunting. If you've ever felt something watching from the dark, subscribe now and stay close with MindLoop. I need to know if I'm the only one who sees this stuff. It all started 2 days earlier. I was doing a road trip across the Appalachian Range, chasing the thrill of seeing a real ghost town. My cousin had told me about Oakhaven. It was a mining community that just quit. Supposedly, a flash flood had wiped out the access road 50 years ago, and everyone just walked away, leaving their houses and cars and even their coffee cups exactly where they were. Sounded like a blast. I figured I'd get some great photos for my Instagram. Big mistake. By the end of this, you'll know why I sold my truck and won't go near another abandoned place again. I drove past the rusted-out Oakhaven, popped 312 sign, and the first thing I noticed wasn't the silence, but the smell. It wasn't decay, not exactly. It was more like an ancient, bitter dust. The smell of concrete and sulfur and something old and wild. I got out of the truck and the air felt heavy, like I was moving through water. I started taking pictures. The town was exactly as advertised, pristine in its abandonment. A schoolhouse with books open on the desks. A diner with a menu board advertising a 7-cent cup of coffee. It was freaky, but also kinda awesome. Then I noticed the windows. Every single window on every single building was open, just a crack. Not broken, open. I checked the temperature. It was 90 degrees out. Why would everyone leave every single window open when they bailed? It didn't make sense. I kept walking, eventually heading toward the church spire. I could see poking up over the overgrown trees. That's when I met the old woman. She wasn't standing in the town. She was sitting on the roof of the general store, perched right on the peak like a gargoyle. I froze. She was wearing a dress from the 1920s, dark green and faded, and her hair was white and braided tight. She didn't move. She didn't acknowledge me. She just sat there, looking down the empty road toward the sign I'd passed. I figured she was a squatter. Just some old lady who decided to live off the grid in a dead town. I raised my hand to wave, but something stopped me. Her eyes. Even from a distance, they looked totally wrong, like two flat black pools of water. I slowly lowered my hand and backed away, pretending I hadn't seen her. I moved quickly, cutting into a side street full of crumbling bungalows. I thought I was safe, but the second I was out of sight, I heard it. A high, thin wail. It wasn't human. It was the sound of a tea kettle screaming, but layered with pure, ancient pain. I froze. I looked over my shoulder. And that's when I saw the front door of the general store swing open. The old woman wasn't on the roof anymore. The front door of the general store didn't just open. It was wrenched back hard, slamming against the outer wall with a splintering crack that echoed like a rifle shot. The silence was instantly broken. I didn't stick around to see if the old woman was in the doorway. I sprinted. I ran into the first open house I could find, a tiny ranch-style place with paint peeling off the porch. I locked the front door, slammed the deadbolt, and dropped to the dusty floor, gasping for air. My heart was hammering so hard it felt like it was going to break a rib. I crouched behind a moth-eaten sofa and forced myself to listen. The wailing sound was back, but now it was closer. Much closer. It was moving up the street, a shrieking, agonized sound that felt like it was tearing the air itself apart. A curiosity gap hit me hard even then. What I found in that dead town, I wish I could unsee. The sound stopped right outside the house. Dead silence. I could hear the wind rustling the dead leaves outside, and the frantic drumming of blood in my ears. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying she wouldn't see me through the window. Then I felt it, the cold. Not just a drop in temperature, but a deep, penetrating chill that felt like someone had poured liquid nitrogen into the room. It smelled like wet dirt and old pennies. I opened my eyes. Across the room, the handle on the kitchen door was slowly turning. Slowly. The deadbolt was still latched on the front door. But this was a back door, and it was opening from the inside. How? I hadn't come in that way. The knob stopped turning. The door didn't open. But on the floor, right at the base of the door, a thin stream of dirt and gray ash started to trickle out from under the crack. It was like something was shoveling earth inside the house. The pile grew quickly, hissing faintly as if it were still hot. Then I heard a whisper. It wasn't in my ear, but in my chest. It vibrated through my ribs, a rattling sound that spoke an alien language, then shifted perfectly to English. "You broke the quiet." I scrambled back, knocking over a dusty floor lamp. I stood up, grabbing a heavy porcelain figurine off a shelf, ready to swing. I was freaking out, completely losing it. I saw my breath plume out in the freezing air. The pile of ash grew larger, and in the center of it, a shape started to rise. It was an arm, thin and white, looking exactly like a piece of dead birchwood. It pushed up through the dirt, and its hand opened. The hand wasn't connected to a body. It was just an arm rising from the earth on the kitchen floor. It pointed a single, impossibly long finger right at me. Then the lights flickered. Wait, lights? This town hadn't had power in 50 years. A single bare light bulb hanging in the hallway ceiling suddenly came on. Buzzing violently, it didn't just turn on. It pulsed with a sick amber glow. And when it pulsed, the detached arm moved faster, closer to me. The entity was using the town's own dead electricity. It was adapting. I bolted for the front door, scrambling to get the deadbolt open. I looked back and the light exploded in a flash of blinding white, showering the room in broken glass. The arm was gone, but the shadow it cast on the wall was still there, stretching impossibly tall, reaching for the ceiling. I busted out of the house and didn't stop running until I reached my truck. That's when the wailing started again, right behind me. I threw myself inside the cab, locked the doors, and cranked the ignition. Nothing, just the pathetic clicking sound of a dead battery. It was fine an hour ago. Now it was dead. I looked in my rearview mirror. The old woman. She was standing 20 feet away, right in the middle of the street. She wasn't running. She was just standing, wearing that faded green dress. Her face was completely hidden by the shadow of her wide-brimmed hat, but I could feel those black eyes on me. Her lips didn't move, but the whisper was back, louder this time, right next to my ear, despite the locked window. "The binding is broken. You let me out." I turned the key one more time, jamming it hard. It bent. I was trapped. She started to walk toward the truck, one slow, deliberate step after the next. She was moving too calmly for a terrified hiker, but too deliberately for a ghost. She was hunting, and as she got closer, I noticed what she was carrying. It was my backpack, the one I'd left on the passenger seat when I went to take photos. She held it loosely in her other hand. She reached the truck, and I shrank against the driver's door. She didn't try to open my door. She walked around the front grille. She came right up to the passenger side, and then she placed my backpack down on the hood. She leaned in, her face finally emerging from the shadow. Her eyes were gone, just empty sockets, but the thing inside her was still staring. That's when I saw her hand move, the hand of the dead woman. That's when I saw her hand move. It wasn't the slow twitch from before. This was a purposeful, bony articulation. The knuckles were massive and white, the fingers long and needle-thin. It reached out not to grab me, but to place my backpack gently on the hood of the truck. The contact was so soft, yet the sound of the zipper sliding open was deafeningly loud in the dead silence of the town. She leaned in, her face finally emerging from the shadow of the wide-brimmed hat. Her eyes were gone, just empty. Sockets, but the thing inside her was still staring. I could see the desiccated lips pull back in a grimace that looked less like a smile and more like a tear in the fabric of her skin. She didn't have to breathe, but I felt a cold breath wash over the glass. The whisper came again, right through the window, but this time it was layered. It was the old woman's voice, raspy, weak, and full of terror, fighting a second voice, deep and resonant like gravel sliding down a clay pipe. "The binding is broken. You let me out. Help me. Please, I'm still here. You will pay the debt." I scrambled for my phone, which was in my jeans pocket, but the deep voice cut through my panic. "It's useless. The wires are cut. The spirits feed on the lack of signal here. They always have." This thing wasn't just a ghost. It was an entity that understood modern communication and actively blocked it. It was like a jinn, an old manipulative power tied to the earth itself. Then the revelation hit me. Why my name? I hadn't found out yet, but I knew I would soon. I watched, horrified, as the hand reached up and, with a casual ease that defied its skeletal appearance, tore the passenger door handle right off my truck. It didn't break the metal. It just cleanly peeled it away from the frame like wet paper. This was physical manifestation, not just some hazy apparition. This was genuine, tangible danger. The entity stepped back, still maintaining eye contact with my empty socket reflection. It tilted its head, a gesture of ancient, cruel curiosity. I needed to know what this thing was. I remembered seeing a tiny, collapsed historical marker leaning against the old church spire on my way in. I had to get out of the truck. While the entity was looking at the hood, watching the wind lift the pages of a notebook that had spilled from my backpack, I made my move. I threw the gear shift into neutral, reached through the broken space where the door handle used to be, and released the lock. I threw my weight against the driver's side door, falling out onto the dry asphalt. The moment I hit the ground, the wailing started again, right behind me. I ran toward the church. I sprinted past the diner, past the schoolhouse where the wind was now slamming the open door violently, back and forth, back and forth. The air was getting colder and thicker with that smell of sulfur and ancient dust. I got to the church and ducked behind the crumbling stone wall. The historical marker was there. I wiped 50 years of grime off the plaque with the sleeve of my shirt and read the backstory. It explained that Oak Haven was founded in 1888, built over a series of rich coal seams. But before the miners came, the land was home to a reclusive settlement led by a woman named Eliza Vane. She was a notorious root woman and herbalist, branded a witch by neighboring settlements. In 1856, a group of travelers trying to cross the mountains accused her of cursing their children. They tracked her down, captured her, and executed her by hanging her from the highest oak tree in the area, then buried her body directly beneath the foundation stone of what would eventually become the Oak Haven Church. They believed they had imprisoned her evil forever. The binding is broken. You let me out. I felt sick. The open windows, the sulfur smell, the ancient wailing. This wasn't a ghost. This was an ancient, malevolent entity, a true, supernatural demon or jinn that had been trapped, using the corpse and the curse of Eliza. Vane is a massive battery, held down by the weight of the church. The flash flood that cut the road, it must have weakened the foundations. And my arrival, the vibration of my truck, the act of not leaving quickly, had fully destabilized the ancient prison. I was the key that turned the lock. A cold hand clamped down on my shoulder. Not the skeletal hand, but a strong, warm, living man's hand. I spun around. It was John, the friendly local I'd met at the gas station 20 miles back. The one who warned me about getting too close to the quiet. He looked desperate, sweating despite the cold air. But when he spoke, his eyes were wide and blank. He didn't sound like himself. "You need to leave right now," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It's coming for the core. The curse needs a soul to finish the circuit. It needs you." I looked at John's face, searching for the friendly, tired man I'd met at the gas station. His skin was pasty and his eyes were too wide, completely devoid of expression. It wasn't John. It was a projection. I could feel the cold radiating from the woman. Eliza, Vane's host body, who was now walking up the street. She was moving fast, no longer with the slow, deliberate pace of a hunter, but with the urgency of a creature whose prey had just bolted. The wailing was constant now, an audible sonic weapon that rattled my teeth. I knew this wasn't John talking. This was the real terrified John, a piece of his consciousness or his actual spirit somehow projecting a warning from wherever he was imprisoned, or wherever he was hiding. "What is it?" I whispered, pressing myself against the rough stone of the church. "It's a djinn," John's projection rattled out, his eyes darting frantically toward the advancing figure, a powerful one bound here centuries ago, long before Eliza Vane. She found it, tried to control it, but it possessed her instead. The villagers didn't kill her. They killed the body and thought the foundation would keep the entity trapped in the dirt. They created a permanent anchor for the djinn's shadow self. That woman out there? She's not Eliza. She's the djinn's walking, decaying vessel. And now, thanks to you, it's loose, and it needs a new, fresh host to make the binding permanent. He slammed his warm hand onto my chest, and the shock of the physical touch was agonizing. It felt like an electrical current, and I screamed, stumbling backward. The projection of John flickered, his voice dissolving into static. It needs a soul. To live, run! The word run was elongated, echoing. And then John's face simply vanished. His space instantly replaced by the terrifying, whispering wind. I turned and bolted for the church door. I didn't care about the risk. The open street was a death sentence. I threw myself against the heavy oak door. It was locked. Crap. I frantically searched the ground for something. Anything heavy enough to break the stained glass window. The wailing sound was right behind the wall now, the sound of tearing wood and stone echoing horribly. I found a loose brick, heavy and covered in moss. I reared back and smashed it through the lowest pane of glass, tearing my shirt on the broken shards as I squeezed through the opening. I landed inside the church sanctuary. It was freezing cold, completely dark, and smelled overpoweringly of sulfur and grave dust. I pulled out my phone flashlight. It still worked, just no signal, and swept the beam across the room. The center aisle was split open. Not a crack. A massive, jagged fissure running straight down the middle of the church floor, right where the altar used to be. The earth beneath was black, wet, and steaming faintly. The air was thick with the chilling knowledge that I was standing directly over the grave of Eliza, Vane and the Jinn's anchor. A sensory detail hit me. I heard a sharp, dry clicking sound, like a massive insect running across the wooden pews. I whipped the flashlight toward the sound. The pews were moving. They were sliding, grating loudly across the floor, all of them moving inward, stacking up to create a barricade around the massive fissure in the floor. The Jinn wasn't trying to scare me. It was trying to trap me over the hole. It was pure, raw, maximum danger. I screamed and jumped the nearest pew, scrambling toward the back door, but the clicking intensified. I looked up. Hanging from the rafters, tangled in ancient cobwebs, were bodies. 3 of them. They weren't moving, just hanging there like gruesome, pale fruit, and one of them was wearing the same style of clothing as John's gas, station uniform. The whisper was back, booming inside my skull this time, sounding like thousands of tiny voices saying the same thing in unison. The core is complete. Come home. I realized the danger wasn't outside. It was here, in the cold, unholy space above the shattered grave. I could see the outline of the old woman in the main doorway, silhouetted by the setting sun, but she wasn't coming in. The entity was in the air, in the church structure itself, using the furniture and the bodies of its previous victims to enclose me. I made it to the back door, slammed it open, and threw myself outside into the small, overgrown cemetery. It was a full-out panic now. I turned around, and that's when I saw the woman standing in the doorway of the church, blocking my escape. But she wasn't alone. Standing right beside her was John. The real John. He was alive, but his eyes were completely black, just like the empty sockets of the old woman. He had his own host body now, and both of them started to walk toward me in perfect, cruel synchronization. I was trapped in the overgrown cemetery, the crumbling stone wall of the church at my back, and 2 possessed human hosts advancing on me from the front. The old woman, Eliza's corpse, moved with a stiff, shuffling gait, while John, the real John, was gone, replaced by another piece of the Jinn's consciousness, walked with a terrifying, loose-limbed parody of life. His face was slack, his black eyes tracking my every move. I scrambled over a low, unmarked tombstone, kicking up a cloud of dry dirt. The wailing from the church was replaced by a low, guttural chanting that seemed to rise from the cracked earth itself. It was the deep, resonant voice I'd heard earlier, speaking in a language that felt older than recorded time. The old woman stopped 10 feet away. John kept moving, approaching me with his hands held out. His lips didn't move, but the deep voice spoke through his chest. You have returned the key to the lock. The core is stable. Now the Jinn requires the payment for its freedom. I don't owe you anything, I screamed, backing away toward the thick, dark woods surrounding the graveyard. John chuckled, a dry, empty sound that scraped against my nerves. Everyone who seeks out the hidden places owes the price. You came seeking the old magic. Now the old magic seeks you. Eliza's host is failing. It's too weak to sustain the life. But you are young. You are a perfect vessel. I realized the horrifying twist. The Jinn hadn't chosen John. It had possessed him out of necessity when Eliza's host failed, but John wasn't strong enough either. It was just keeping him around until a viable, strong new host showed up. Me. I was the upgrade. I threw the brick I was still holding directly at John's head. It struck his forehead with a sickening thud. He didn't even flinch. The clay brick simply crumbled into dust against his skin. This thing wasn't just wearing John. It had reinforced the body with supernatural strength. I turned and ran into the darkness of the woods. The trees here were thick, the ground uneven, covered in ancient gnarled roots. I could hear the two hosts following, their footsteps surprisingly silent on the dead leaves. I ran until I hit a massive, jagged hole in the earth, an old, abandoned mine shaft covered by rotted wooden planks. I stopped dead. I looked up. The two figures emerged from the trees, standing side by side, perfectly still. They were waiting. They were hurting me. The old woman raised her skeletal hand. She wasn't pointing at me. She pointed down at the mine shaft. And then she spoke, but not in the jinn's voice. It was a choked, weak cry, her actual voice, fighting through the possession. "The light is down there!" It was a fragment of Eliza Vane's soul fighting the jinn to give me a chance. The binding wasn't broken. It was just weakened. If the jinn wanted a host, I wouldn't let it take me in the dark. I needed light. I didn't hesitate. I jumped down the mine shaft. The fall was maybe 20 feet, and I landed hard on a pile of something soft and yielding. I looked down, switching on my flashlight. The soft stuff was decades of rotted canvas, clothes and strange blackened bones. I scrambled up and looked around. I was in a vast, dry tunnel, and the air was miraculously clean. And then I saw it, a small, flickering blue glow far down the tunnel. The light. I started running toward it, ignoring the pain in my ankle. Behind me, I heard the impossible sound of something massive dropping into the shaft, followed by the deep, echoing chanting. The jinn had dropped one of its hosts down here to chase me. I reached the light. It wasn't a lamp. It was a perfectly smooth, black obsidian stone, roughly the size of a bowling ball, sitting on a natural pedestal of rock. It pulsed with a cold, blue luminescence. It looked alien, evil, and powerful. I heard the footsteps echoing closer. John's host body came around the bend. His clothes were shredded, his face coated in dust, but his black eyes burned. "Do not touch the stone. It is the true anchor. Touch it, and the debt will be paid with your soul," the jinn roared through John. I looked at the stone. It was beautiful, terrifying, and drawing me in. If it was the anchor, maybe I could use it against the entity. I reached out my hand. Just as my fingers brushed the cold obsidian, a massive, skeletal hand, the hand of Eliza Vane's host, grabbed me from the side, pulling me away from the stone and throwing me violently against the tunnel wall. The old woman had somehow managed to descend the shaft as well. I looked up. The old woman was standing between me and John, her empty eyes fixed on the obsidian stone, not on me. Her lips peeled back in a silent, agonizing snarl. The jinn's voice, the thousand whispers, screamed through John's body. "Treachery! You are still bound!" The old woman slowly turned her head to me. Her mouth opened, and in a final, heartbreaking gasp, she whispered, "Run, find the water." Then John lunged. I scrambled away just as his possessed hand slammed against the stone. The obsidian flared bright white, letting out a horrific, high-pitched scream that wasn't human or jinn, but pure, terrible frequency. The flash blinded me, and the last thing I felt was the ground shaking violently beneath my feet, the sound of the tunnel walls beginning to collapse all around me. I was buried alive in the dark, with two possessed creatures fighting over a glowing black stone, and a single final command echoing in my head: find the water. It didn't end here. What happened next is even darker. I'm still alive, but I'm lost in the tunnels beneath Oakhaven, and the jinn is hunting me. If you want to know the truth, comment part 2 and stay with MindLoop by subscribing. If this gets 1,000 likes, I will reveal how I escaped the dark and what the jinn truly fears.